What's up, everybody? I am here with one of the closing events of our 24-hour reveal party over here at Gamisodes. We're super excited to bring Dieter to the stage here. My friend, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. Can you still hear me okay?
Oh my gosh, you sound incredible. It sounds like, ASMR-esque, if you ask me. So I'm so excited to chat with you. Obviously, it's such a cool opportunity to chat with someone on an essential part of Dapper Flow and the whole ecosystem. And I think you're kind of in the shadows a lot, and maybe not many people know who you are or see your face, but obviously you're one of those people that Dapper and Flow wouldn't be what it is today without you. So I just want to give you a second to introduce who you are, let the people listening know a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into more questions about you.
Yeah, for sure. So who am I? I'm a tech guy. I like building systems, especially universal systems that have a lot of different use cases, especially use cases we sort of can't imagine until they come along. And so, in 2013, I joined Roham at the parent company to Dapper Labs called Axiom Zen. And it was an amazing trip sort of right out the gate. He's, anybody who's familiar with him knows what a visionary he is, what a great product person he is, how much empathy he has for users, and how much he really understands and values community. And what was interesting, though, is that for all of those things, I think, which are, obviously if you've spoken to him or seen him speak, but he has a very, intuitive understanding of technology, right? He's done some engineering, but he's not an engineer. But when I started talking to him about some of my ideas of what we could build, even in those early days, long before, we got into CryptoKitties and all the blockchain stuff, just talking to him in those early days, I would say, oh, well, I have this crazy idea for how technology could do such and such. And he would immediately jump on that. And, obviously, there were concerns about what was possible and whatnot, but it was just this really great pairing of, sort of his creativity around how technology could be leveraged to create real user value and build sustainable businesses. And, the creative bent I have, which is, what are interesting and novel use cases for technology, especially new technology. So obviously that culminated in 2017 at the sort of most obvious thing that most of the people here probably know about, when we launched CryptoKitties. And CryptoKitties, it was actually the idea of one of our other coworkers, Max Lobel. But the basic idea was let's put cats on the blockchain, and it really was sort of up to me and the other engineers to figure out what that meant in a concrete sense. And as we were building it, going back to what I said at the beginning, building systems that go beyond what we can imagine, it really became clear to me that what we were building was fundamentally new and generalizable. And so that's when I came up with the idea of sort of formalizing what we called NFTs, non-fungible tokens. I sort of popularized or introduced that term to most people through ERC721. And so I wrote ERC721. I published it to the Ethereum community, and, crickets. It was really interesting. There were some really great people. I'm friends with many of them to this day who jumped in the early days. But until CryptoKitties launched, very few people saw the potential of it. Then we launched CryptoKitties. ERC721 got a ton of attention, of course, spawned what we now know as a whole industry. And just the creativity that came out of that was, like nothing I could have imagined. And it was an amazing feeling to create something that at its heart was relatively simple and straightforward, but it took this idea that, CryptoPunks have been nibbling around and Rare Pepes have been nibbling around, and it said, no, this is a thing. We can identify this thing, we can codify this thing, we can make it so that this thing is interoperable between lots of different projects and lots of different creators and application developers. and we can make an ecosystem around this thing. But I mean, to think that it would become what it became over the following 5 years is would have been the height of arrogance to imagine that anything like 1/10 the size of what actually happened could happen. And so, we launched CryptoKitties. We were overwhelmed by our community. We were overwhelmed by, the reaction of the world. But we were also overwhelmed by the fact that Ethereum couldn't keep up with the attention. We broke Ethereum. We were using up more than a third of the gas, all of Ethereum's gas at one point.
Wow.
And, we 10x'd the transaction fees in the space of about a week. And it was really clear to us that this just wasn't going to scale to a consumer audience. And so shortly after that, we started Dapper Labs with some funding from some great investors who have been amazing allies throughout the whole building of Dapper Labs. And then we got to work deciding what blockchain we should build on. And it's funny, I paired up with a product manager named Lane LaFrance, and she and I were working on this problem, me on the technical side and her on the product and, sort of business reality side of things. And she said to Roham, don't worry, I'm not going to let Dieter design his own blockchain. We're gonna find something that works. I had a reputation of wanting to reinvent every wheel. But we spent 3 months researching. We had 3 different engineers and myself and Lane, and we probably read 100 different white papers. We probably talked to almost 20 different teams that were proposing various blockchains. And in a weird way, I felt like none of them got it. Because they were all trying to solve the problem of how do you build a blockchain. And we were trying to solve the problem of how do you build a consumer-facing decentralized application. And the blockchain is the answer to both those questions, but the details of the blockchain matter a lot. And so eventually, we came back and we said, look, we don't like any of these options, but by talking to these teams, reading these white papers, doing all this research, we see a bunch of pieces that haven't been put together yet, and we can combine those in a really unique way, separating consensus and computation. And we think we can build something that has all of the features that we need. And so we went to our investors. They said no. They said, no, you guys don't know how to build blockchains. You guys know how to build blockchain applications. Leave it to the other teams to build the blockchains. And I was persistent. I was like, no, you don't understand. Let me sit you down and talk to this. And so they brought in their technical experts, and it took a while. It took months of us documenting things, them asking questions, often very good questions of well, how are you going to solve this problem? But eventually we came up with something, and there's a secret with VCs is that they don't like their investments to diversify. They want their portfolio to be diversified. So each of the people they're investing in, they want them to do one thing, so that if that thing does well, they take off, and they're not distracted. Because if they always have another bet, right? So they don't want their investments to diversify. But in the end, we just look, this is just too good of an idea, and so we ended up, doing an additional fundraising round, sort of with Flow, which was codenamed Bamboo at that time, at the heart of it. And we launched it, and now here we are today with millions of people having signed up and used Flow, and hundreds of different developers building on it, and it's. I don't know. I'm incredibly proud of what the engineering team that started it built, but also just so gratifying when the community engages, right, at every level, from application developers getting excited about what we've done to really hardcore engineers in our community who engage with us on sort of the most technical details, and it's just. Yeah, it's been a very, very exciting and very overwhelming 5 years.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, it is something you should be proud of, and coming from someone on the other end of it, where I'm not. I would always consider myself a fringe tech guy. I I'm from that generation where we got computers. Like we started getting the first grant that my school got was for the Macintosh, the first or the Apple, the first like that see-through Apple. And we were like dissecting them, and so it was like cool to like I'm a fringe tech guy. I could always figure it out, but like I never got into coding. So blockchain really brought that to my plate of like being interested in it, right? And so when I started learning more about flow and not really understanding the difference between Ethereum and flow, I would have my tech friends kind of poke holes and ask the tough questions. And I remember hosting a spaces back in the day where Jacob Tucker was on. We had, unfortunately, Luke was on. The Dumbo was on, and we were just fielding questions. I think Biarte was there too, fielding questions for people about the tech side of it. And it was mesmerizing how much thought went into making it scalable. And now when you said you're proud of what flow has become, is that kind of the core of what you're proud of, is the scalability? I mean, that's got to be close to like probably one of the most proud moments you have, right? The proof of scalability.
So yes, but it's funny. I think that was certainly that was the original pitch. That was the original problem we were trying to solve, and the way that we've solved that is very elegant. It's very complex, but I think the most reassuring part about that architecture is that when we introduced it, as I said, there was a lot of skepticism from fairly well-informed technical people that worked with these various investor groups, and when we explained to them all the details, they would invariably end up quite impressed. But I was always nervous. Because it was so different. It was so different than what everyone else was doing. But what's amazing and reassuring to me is that when you look at the evolution of the Ethereum 2 community, at about, I think it was at the end of 2020, Vitalik basically came out and said, hey, this sharding thing isn't going to work, which is, the whole thing we were worried about in 2018. But don't worry, we can do what we call data availability shards, and then we can build roll-ups on top of that. And what I realized, and funny, I didn't realize it immediately, because it was a case of convergent evolution. They didn't point to flow and say, hey, we're going to do what they're doing. But if you squint a little, what that group of very intelligent people have come up with is not exactly the same, but it's leveraging the same observation, right? That a blockchain needs a mechanism for deciding which transactions are in, what order they're in, and what the outcome of executing all those transactions are. But you don't need a single node to do all of those things. You can pipeline it between different groups of nodes, and that's what we've done in Flow, right? Flow famously has the multi-node architecture with these 5 different node types all doing a different job, each of them doing a different job. And when you look at Ethereum 2 with its data availability shards, which don't exist yet but are planned, the beacon chain which exists, the optimism and arbitrum execution layers, those things all have direct one-to-one correspondence to the data availability shards are our collection nodes. The beacon chain is our consensus nodes. At the execution layer, the collators, or what are they called? I can't remember what they're called, but anyways, the execution layer in Arbitrum or Optimism, that's like our execution nodes. And so, when I realized that was the architecture they were going to, I was like so relieved, because I was like, okay, like it's not just us, like we're not crazy here. Like other people have seen that this can be the solution to the problem. Having said all of that, right, to get back to your question, and I apologize, I'm meandering a little. Partway through building Flow, we got stuck because we didn't want to use Solidity. We didn't want to use EVM. We had looked at WASM. We looked at Rust. Those all felt like bad solutions to the problem of how should you write smart contracts. And as of today, I think that Cadence is an even greater achievement. And I'm incredibly grateful to the researchers at Carnegie Mellon that came up with this idea of resource-oriented programming, even though they didn't use that term. I'm incredibly grateful for the Move team that was originally at Facebook, who, through conversations with them, like we were both sort of chasing down the same idea, and like through talking to them, they had some, it really clarified in my brain and made it easier for me to think about what this all meant. And obviously most grateful to Bastian, who was the engineer that is the head of the Cadence team, because I've been a smart contract developer, right? Like I was one of the developers that worked on CryptoKitties. I was one of the developers that worked on Cheese Wizards, and so. But I've never written a programming language, and having this team member who could come in, master's degree in programming languages, and partner with me, and create this new language. It's just incredibly powerful, and I do believe that for most technical types using Flow, that's sort of how you get it to be fast, while being decentralized and secure, is important, but it doesn't touch you day to day. It's sort of like once you trust it, you don't have to think about it anymore. Whereas I feel like interacting with Cadence is something that is saving engineers time every single day, making them more productive every single day. And so even though that wasn't part of the original pitch, the idea that we would replace the execution model was something that we never even talked with the investors about. But the more we thought about it, the more we realized it was just going to unlock just like a really interesting set of capabilities that we could be able to give to software engineers to build even more interesting applications.
Mm-hmm. It's actually a perfect segue is what I wanted to chat about a little bit about is, I mean, we've seen, and I only speak from my perspective as someone who's kind of been paying attention for a while, is we've seen the kind of the progress of the blockchain, and really NFTs in general, right? We've seen them start out as the PFP, small communities, tight knit, and then obviously like the money train came in, right? Everybody was like, oh, now NFTs are investments and the 100 times my money and that, and then we started seeing like airdrops, and then we started seeing like in real life utility, staking, all these things we've kind of just gone through and experienced. I see this sense and this feel of going toward gamification. And a lot of projects that I've interviewed over the last year are building toolkits, are building workable, playable games with NFTs and linking wallets and stuff like that. So I kind of wanted to ask you your thoughts on where you see the blockchain going in that capability of like how is it going to transform our gaming? Because I just want to lead with one more example of like one of my favorite analogies that someone gave me was like the sports games these days in Xbox, or even like if you want to talk about what's the dance one where they do the dances and they build the block. I forget what it's Fortnite. It's interesting enough to own the skins, but you don't own the skins, right? And they're not yours; they're inside the game. So when you think about ownership and utilizing that ownership to play games, Flow blockchain is going to become the place to do that. And I'm just curious on if you could touch on that subject a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know if I can touch on that a little bit because this is something I think about a lot, and I have many things to say on it. So I'll try and go light, and then we can dig deeper on the aspects that you think are most interesting. For me, there's sort of like two angles to this, right? First of all, I am hopeful that we can get to the point where people see that the price of these things derives from the value you get from owning them, rather than the point of buying them is what the price does. You know what I mean? Like it's backwards, right? Like it seems like so many people are buying these because of what they expected the price to do, but it should be the exact opposite, right? Like it should be that like, oh, the price of these things is driven by feels to own them, not how it feels to flip them. And so, you know, I think there's like two directions that can go, and the one that's obvious, not obvious, but the one that a lot of people are talking about, and I definitely think it's sort of the next step, is this idea, exactly what you said, right? Like, so many games have cosmetics in them, so many games, and gamers have no problem with buying cosmetics, right? Like, they have no problem with somebody else buying cosmetics. They get a little nervous if you're buying power, right? But even that can be done well, right? Like, so a game like Magic the Gathering, there are cards, like the rare cards have a higher power level, but it's not strictly, you know, when you get to the highest level of play, it is expected that all of the players have access to all of the highest level cards. And so it's not, you know, it's not that any individual card is, you know, 5, 6, 7 figures, and that's the card you have to win. It's like, no, it could be expensive to build a deck, but ultimately, when you get to that high level of play, it's absolutely about skill again. But going back to the cosmetics are the thing that can move from game to game, right? You know, whether it's something as simple as a profile picture, but I am very excited about the various projects that are going beyond that. And so I think that, you know, the kinds of collectibles where it's a community, right? It's you know, whether that's Top Shot or with the NBA or Game of Thrones with Inspector Gadget, there's a community there. There's a cultural aspect. There's a connection with people who love what you love, right? So that's interesting by itself. Then there's this idea of cosmetics and seeing games that actually use those cosmetics. That's very interesting. But where I get really excited is the step after that. And the step after that is when things actually have utility on chain, right? And you go all the way back to CryptoKitties. We did that. We did it in a very, very lightweight way, in a way that really had sort of, you know, like it was really designed around this mindset of getting that 1 year, right, of when we were constantly releasing kitties and whatnot. And we didn't really know what was going to happen after that. But it was intended to be a game where having the kitty wasn't all you could do with it. The verb of, you know, there was something else you could do in this case, breeding cats and trying to play this breeding game and playing, you know, with the, you know, looking on chain, see what the genes of the cats are, you know, trying to predict what might come out if you were to breed your kitties together. But I think that is where we can go a lot farther, where you have a game where you own the game pieces, but the logic of the game is also on the smart contract. And more importantly, that opens up the possibility that logic of the game can be extended by other developers. And so you end up with this sort of like mods on steroids mindset where, you know, some of the greatest games, you mentioned Fortnite, right? Fortnite is a modification of a game, right, that the Epic itself had made. The original Fortnite was not, you know, the battle royale that you know has made them so many billions of dollars. It was a modification. The modification was a copy of a game, PUBG, that was itself a modification of another game, right? Like, mods are people taking existing games and modifying them, right? You know, the whole, you know, I can't remember the name of it now. This is like the biggest game. I'm sorry, I'm blank. But
you're good.
Games that there are many games that are popular today that started out as mods, and because of the model of I own this software and you have a limited capacity to make changes to it, and you can't monetize your changes to it, what inevitably happens is that if a mod is successful enough, that the mod creator has to create a whole new game, right? Not only is that wasted effort, but now the original game creator, they're cut out. They can't, there's no like rev share there. Whereas if we find a set of games that can be mediated by smart contracts. A mod creator can make an extension that, depending on the nature of the extension, could itself be monetizable, but which doesn't necessitate doesn't have to replace the existing game, because the nature of smart contracts is that I can't mess up your code, right? Like if your code is properly written, I can build something. And I can't subvert it because the blockchain itself is maintaining those security properties. So I don't know. We saw this with CryptoKitties. We saw people building racing games. We saw people building, dress up games for cats, kitty hats, and I just think that notion of an entire ecosystem being built by a mix of dozens of hobbyists and commercial software developers, all the way potentially up to AAA gaming studios, working together to make an ecosystem where users can play together is, I just think it's going to unleash a kind of creativity that we just haven't seen in the software space.
Right. It's such an interesting, just way to look at it is like having your own effect without affecting, right? I'm a language guy, so I've always been a big fan of that effect and effect. It's one of the things I always get right because I know it so well is the effects versus the effect. And it's a really interesting concept to be able to, it just personalizes these games. And somebody in the chat actually made a good point, like Skyrim got really big due to mods. And like, and Cyberpunk 2077, a lot of these games do, get larger because of mods. And I know one off the top of my head that they don't allow, that I always wanted them to allow, which is Grand Theft Auto. I always wanted those like computer mods inside the game, but you're right. The problem is they're trying to, allow you to affect the game, have your own effects, but without affecting, right? Without gaming the system. So it's interesting that the blockchain is going to hopefully and ideally allow that separation to happen. And there are a lot of projects right now on Flow Blockchain that are pushing those limits. And we're talking specifically about your arch nemesis rival with CryptoKitties called Solar Pups. I'm a big fan of Solar Pups, and I think it's hilarious that they did a lot of what CryptoKitties is doing in the sense of breeding and stuff like that. But obviously dogs. So we have a little inside fight here in Gamisodes too of Mad Cat versus Brain. So I love that there's that playfulness, but I do see that the future of gaming being on the blockchain. I just love the idea of ownership and allowing people to take hold of that. So I do want to shift it just a little bit. I do have a couple questions from the audience I want to go over, and feel free if you want to be specific or general. And so this is, it says, when are these utilities possibly coming? Is there a timeline of, and I'll give you a few, active mobile app that supports Android, DApp support for coin exchange, flow to USDC/FUSD, and flow governance staking being able to be taken part of by people all over the world, and then a naming service. And I can go over those again. I'm not sure if that was too quick or not, but we can go one by one, which is an active mobile app that supports Android. Is there anything being done on that right now?
Yes. So we have, we've got a mobile team that is working on both wallet software as an extension of Dapper Wallet, as well as demonstrating. Well, it's obviously for our users, right? People, demonstrating for our sports apps what's possible with mobile. But there's going to be what's critical about that, right? From the flow standpoint, right? Obviously, there's the Dapper Sports Studio standpoint, which is, hey, we're building a mobile app for the sports games. What's critical about that is it's going to demonstrate what other teams can do, and we'll have lots of SDKs and whatnot that we're dog fooding right now as we build those that are going to come out. So, for example, like we have Unity and Unreal SDKs coming out that will support mobile, and the mobile wallet coming out. So Timelines, nothing specific yet. We are going to probably ship iOS first. Learn what we can. Every time you ship software, you get it wrong. So we'll learn and adapt, and then I don't want to say port to Android, because the team is actively building the infrastructure for Android in parallel. So it's definitely not going to be a port. But in terms of a final product, the Android product will not ship until after the iOS product has been out in market and gotten feedback first. What was the next one?
DApp support for coin exchange, flow to USDC/FUSD.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know which hat to wear, right? The flow hat, which is where that all exists, right? Like if application developers, if that's the most important feature for them, the primitives exist on chain in order to support that. But a DApp developer needs to make the assessment for themselves as to if that's where they want to put their time and effort. One of the awesome features of Flow is that our transactions are not function calls, they're scripts. And so a DApp developer can create a transaction that they propose to the user that says, hey, this thing's for sale in Flow. I see that you have USDC. I'm going to use the on-chain DEX to convert your USDC into Flow before I buy the NFT, or vice versa, if you hold Flow and the NFT's up for sale for USDC. So that capability exists, and happy to talk to any engineers who want to know exactly how to leverage that. In terms of when certain applications are going to adopt that, I mean, that's up to the application developers. So I can't really speak to that, and it doesn't make a lot of sense in the context of Dapper Wallet, which is obviously the product we have direct control over.
Awesome. The next one we had was a naming service.
Yeah, so there's a couple of teams building naming services right now. I think it's .fn and then .find. We will almost certainly not make like a single official naming service. We are talking to both the .fn and the .find teams to try and come up with a mechanism by which they can share the .flow namespace. The world is always better when you have people that are, almost every problem is better solved by light competition, where doing better is going to get you more users, and it keeps the teams incentivized to move forward. So we're having those discussions now. Exactly how that works out remains to be seen, but those naming services, I think .find is pretty far along, and so I encourage people to look into that, because I think both those teams are focused on that problem, and I think it's much better for a team that can focus on that problem to do it, rather than for us to do it as sort of we check the box and then we move on to the next thing. I think it's better to have teams for whom it's not a box to check; it's a service to keep alive in the long run.
Yeah, so that was the last of the questions for the Discord for right this second. I wanted to shift a little bit. Just a personal note, I'm pretty curious. You were obviously the creator of ERC721. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that is and kind of how that, affects or allows you some space to grow in the flow area versus the ETH.
So ERC721, I think it did two things, and the first one is abstract, and I guarantee you that there's going to be somebody in the audience who doesn't agree that this is important, or that it's real, or that it's a thing. But to me, actually, it's the more important thing. There's all sorts of people talking about what was the first NFT and this, that, and the other thing. But I think what's critical is that there was no notion, there was no concept. Like there wasn't we know what a fire truck is. It's not just a truck that goes and puts out fires, right? Like the notion of fire truck is a very specific notion that it's not just the meaning of the two words put together. It is is a specific kind of fire truck. And you could imagine a truck that goes and puts out fires that looks nothing like a fire truck, and people would think that was a weird thing to call fire truck. An NFT is like that, right? It's not just non-fungible token. And and as I indicated before, like there were all sorts of experiments around this idea, right? CryptoPunks being sort of the most obvious, but there were a bunch of others. And I think the most important thing ERC721 did was it said, look, there is a set of we can make this a category, right? It's not individual examples, it's a category. And the category has sort of these attributes, right? Everything that's in this category should have these attributes. Now, of course, what the second thing that ERC721 did was it said this is exactly how you interact with a smart contract that exposes assets with those attributes, right? Every single one is unique. It has a unique identifier, and it's separate from all the others. Obviously it has an owner, and then additional attributes on top of that are encouraged but optional. And so obviously we have a fungible and non-fungible token standard on Flow. It's not called ERC721 because ERC stands for Ethereum Request for Comment. So and these weren't, we have something similar to ERC or EIP on Ethereum. They're called flips, and that's Flow Improvement Proposal. Because fungible tokens and non-fungible tokens are sort of so obvious, these technically can't be called flips because they came, they were part of the first version. They weren't something that came later. Even though on Ethereum, even the notion of a custom fungible token, ERC20, came after the blockchain had launched. So we don't really have sort of a one-to-one, here is the sort of ERC721 equivalent on Flow. There is a non-fungible token spec, but the critical thing is that I think is that it created a concept. And I think that anyone here who feels like they can look at two smart contracts or two digital assets and say, this one's an NFT, this one isn't, I think that's the most important thing that ERC721 did.
Right, man. I really appreciate you jumping in on that. It's interesting just to learn all this stuff. Like, it's overwhelming for me, but I haven't been this interested in tech my whole life. So just the blockchain technology in general, and just fungible tokens, decentralization. So I want to just dive in real quick because we don't have a lot of time left. So it's a classic Jimbo to dive into some philosophy. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about your views on, intellectual property protection and moving forward, and how important, that is to the blockchain in general, and specifically to what you guys do on Flow and the Dapper side of things is how important that is as you're making decisions to move forward, and just in the sense of allowing artists that space to create and to keep creating and to keep being innovative. What does that mean to you, and how does that kind of factor into the decisions you've made and will make?
Interestingly enough, I think I honestly feel like if more people thought of NFTs as the moral equivalent of a print or a pressing or a mold, the easier it would be for people to sort of think about what an NFT is and why it matters. The example I always give is that I can go and buy a Mickey Mouse plushie, but that doesn't give me the right to sell Mickey Mouse posters or make a Mickey Mouse movie, right? On the other hand, just because I own a Mickey Mouse plushie doesn't mean that Disney Corp can come into my house and say, oh, actually, we've changed the brand color of Mickey's pants from yellow to blue, and so we're going to swap out your plushie, right? They can't force that upon me. And so whenever people ask that question, I always encourage them to ask the question of what would you do if this was physical, right? If your kitty was a figurine, what rights would the creator have and what rights would the owner have? Now, starting from that, we can go beyond that, right? So in particular with CryptoKitties, because every kitty was visually unique, we actually created a license for that said, look, you can make money selling merchandise with your kitty on it. You can do that. It's our IP, right? If it was Mickey Mouse NFT, you couldn't. But because each one is different, and as a choice as creators, we decided to do that. but we had to write a license, right? Akin to like an open source license. I think hopefully most of the listeners have a sense that there's like different kinds of open source. There's like an open source license that says, the Creative Commons licenses that says, hey, if you're just doing something creative that's not making you any money, no problem. You can use this. As soon as you're in commercial usage, I want you to talk to me and we'll discuss a potential licensing fee, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's also like, hey, this is totally fine. You can use this for whatever. You want to make some money? Go nuts. Go ahead and make some money for this. I just want to put this out in the world. And there's all these different variations of it. And so part of what happened is that the interest, the excitement, the questions outran the ability for us to answer them. So with CryptoKitties, we created a license. We put it out there. We encouraged other people who to use that license as well, if they wanted to. I'm not sure how many other projects chose to do that. Recently, last year, Andreessen Horowitz worked with the law firm to create what they called the Can't Be Evil licenses, which were intended to sort of answer this question of like, as a token holder, an NFT holder, what are your rights vis-a-vis the art? Our own legal team felt like those licenses were a little light in terms of like not being robust enough in terms of making it really clear, both legally and sort of in layman's terms, where the line was drawn for these various things. So we've actually been working on this exact problem and trying to create a series of licenses that span the realm of like, hey, this is yours, right? You own this NFT, you own this likeness, you have the ability to go and do whatever you want with this, make all the money you want with it, and no one else does, right? All the way up to, hey, we're the Disney Corp. We are going to maintain as much control over this as we would if we sold you a Mickey Mouse pin, because Mickey Mouse is like super important to us. And I think we should support all of those things. I don't think we should force Disney to say, if you're going to do an NFT, you have to do it this way. And I definitely don't think that we should we shouldn't give the power of certain creators to say, hey, this is a one-on-one. It's yours now, and it is your, you can
actually,
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to butt in. I was trying to mute my mic. You're good. Go ahead.
And so, like, I really love that. I love it when projects are able to do that. But not every project is, and I think we have to be really important. Now, where I do draw the line is I get very frustrated with IP holders that come to us and say, hey, we want to build this thing and we want to call it an NFT, but we want control over who you can transfer it to. We want control over the terms under which it is sold. We want the ability to pull the artwork at any time and all of this stuff. And I'm like, look, I don't think you should do that. I don't think that when I buy a Mickey Mouse plushie, you should be able to come to my house and bring it back or even forcibly swap it if I don't want that. That's not what ownership means. And the second that you create these digital assets and you give yourself sort of super user powers over that stuff, the value of owning those things goes down. And so you, as the seller, should expect the price of those things to go down. And at that point in time, I even questioned, well, if you're going to give yourself that much level of control, why even call it an NFT? Why even put it on the blockchain? You're just drafting off the real value we've created by building this transformational technology by sort of stealing our word for a thing, even though you're not willing to, as you said philosophically, let your thing have the attributes that everyone has come to associate with this word.
There's actually one of my favorite artists, music people is J. Cole. And, he had a really, really interesting line in one of his albums, and it always stuck really close to my heart, was he said, it's very difficult to get samples with music. And I think music is a whole nother realm of art where this type of logic needs to really be solved. And it's that you should never be allowed to tell someone they can't use your IP. Because if you were inspired by the world, let the world be inspired by you. It's just that you deserve a check. You know what I mean? So it's like he's basically saying that you shouldn't be able to gatekeep people from using what you've created. If you are inspired by the world, let the world be inspired by you. But get be fair. It has to be fair, right? The person has to receive royalties forever, and that's just something I've always held really close to my heart. And that is what's really driven my passion toward the blockchain is royalties for life. I'm a big advocate of someone like, a painting of Vincent Van Gogh is sold. His family should get a check. Or whoever the heirs are of Vincent Van Gogh should be getting paid, because that's his intellectual property and his talent, his skill, and it should be paid forever, regardless of, it should transcend throughout generations. It didn't just stop with that person because, and I don't want to get any deeper with you, Deep. The last thing I'll say is that my hope is that this encourages children. Right, I'm a basketball coach, and I'm all about encouraging behavior, and encourage certain behaviors so that you have outcomes that you aspire to create. And encouraging children to be creative is, in my opinion, one of our only opportunities we have to save this planet. And it's to continue to encourage the children to create, to be artists, to see problems and solve them. And in this world we live in, you pay rent, you got to eat. So to have that assurance that if I'm creating, then I'm always going to be earning from that creation. To me, man, that is like everything that I stand for philosophically as a human being. So I appreciate, obviously, all of the hard work you've put in, and I'm happy to have an opportunity to connect to you. And it makes me happy to hear you say that you're proud, because you should be. I know it's never been all positive. It's always going to be hard. It's when you're doing innovative stuff and you're trying to change the world and how we see the world. It's always going to bring those challenges. So I just want to give you your flowers and appreciate all the hard work you, Roham, all the people, Mickey, all the people that really put in the hard work behind the scenes, because I know that when we talk Dapper, when we talk all these projects, it has this feel of, criticism. And you told me before, you love criticism. Criticism helps you grow. But I just want to be on that flip side and just say, I appreciate you guys putting all the hard work that you put in to keep this dream alive and to keep the blockchain flowing. And, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you and all the hard work you put in. So I do want to give you the last 5 minutes or so to say whatever you want to the community and kind of give you the spotlight, anything you want to share, anything like that. But again, appreciate you coming on, man.
Well, that was very lovely. Thank you so much, Jimbo. And actually in that spirit, I think if you want to know what makes me most proud is when we create tools and blank canvases and when we see what comes back, right? I love that we created Top Shot, but I love even more that we created a blockchain, we created tools, we created wallet software that have, that dozens of different projects and teams have created content like you have done, like the team here, the Gamification has done, but just like all over the ecosystem, right? And everything from little tools, right? Things like Evaluate Market, which it's not so little anymore, but that, seeing to me, the coolest thing is creating surface area where ecosystems can grow. And so I would encourage everybody who is listening to this to always be thinking about what they're doing, whether they are an application developer, whether they're, even one layer down the stack, they're an infrastructure developer, all the way up to being somebody who's like an end user and just like, hey, I'm creating a collection. Try to think about how what you're doing can be a platform, can be service area for somebody else to create. And then really lean into that, because I feel like that kind of creativity is that's the positive sum interaction that has made humanity so successful. When I do a thing that makes it possible for you to do a thing, then we both benefit, and we create a net creation of value. And if we can get in, we'll always be more successful if we figure out how to play positive sum games rather than zero or negative sum games. And all of the best successes in the long run in this ecosystem have been people who figured out how to build that surface area for creativity that leads to positive sum games. And so I'm really excited to have everyone listening here be a part of that. All right, well, I guess I'll wrap up then. Thanks everyone for coming. I think this has been really great. I thank everyone for the questions, and I absolutely thank the Game team for inviting us all here to enjoy this party.